you some photos, but first I had one more question relating to State's Exhibit 37, the statement of the defendant. The jury heard a tape statement yesterday and had reference to that transcript. I just want to confirm with you, is State's Exhibit 37 appear to be the interview you did that night of the 6th with the defendant?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. We were talking about the search you did that night of the defendant's condo right before we broke, and I want to show you some photographs. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 45. Take a look at the photographs in there if you would. I'll ask you a few questions.
Right, exactly.
Do you have those counts, sir?
Yes, we do, Your Honor.
Any objection to those?
No objection.
Okay.
And are those photographs of, well, we mentioned earlier you talked about the bottle of pills, the empty prescription bottle, and the wedding ring that you saw in the condo that night.
That's correct.
Do those photographs show the areas where you located those?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Your Honor, I would offer State's Exhibit, what's the number in there?
45.
45, Your Honor.
Admitted without objection.
Thank you. I'm going to show these to the jury and have you just walk us through. Looking first at photograph A, what are we seeing here?
This is a photo of the master bath, standing inside the bedroom, close to the bed, with a view into the bathroom, entrance to the bathroom.
And when you say master bath, is it off connected to the master bedroom?
Yes, it is.
Turning to photograph B, what are we seeing in here?
That is the ring on top of the jewelry cleaner solution.
And is that just a close-up of that same view?
Yes.
And this same bathroom that we just looked at photographs of, is that where you located the empty pill bottle as well?
Yes.
Did you actually take into evidence that night the empty prescription bottle?
I did.
Captain Anderson? I'm going to show you what's marked to see if you did it. Tell me if this appears to be actually of that bottle.
It is.
And how can you tell that just from looking at the
These are my initials on the seals, the seams, and my writing showing what is inside the bag.
Okay. I'm going to just have you cut up the packaging first. To look inside. Oh, you got one.
Yeah.
Don't take it out, but just confirm that it's indeed that prescription bottle we've been referring to.
Yes.
Can I just take it from the show counsel? Statement offered Exhibit 46.
Any objection, Mr.
No objection, Your Honor.
Admitted.
I'm going to have you pull that out if you would. And before you, I just want to ask you a few questions about it. First of all, what is the medication that's on that bottle?
It says Indocet.
Okay. And what's the date, according to the label on there, that that was filled?
January 26, 2006.
And does it indicate on that labeling how many pills would have been in that bottle?
Yes. 56.
Okay. And just to make sure, when you recovered that, it was empty?
Yes, that's correct.
Is there also a lid in that container?
Yeah, there's a lid in here.
Do you recall if the lid was on the bottle or not when you recovered it?
I don't recall specifically, but this thing has been fingerprinted, so it's possible that it was removed later.
And I want to talk about the fingerprinting a little. You indicated it's been fingerprinted. How do you know that?
There's fingerprint dust all over it, black.
And is there also blue tape on that evidence envelope that means something to you?
Yes.
What does that mean?
This means it's been examined, processed at Washington State Control Crime Lab.
Can't take that from all and just hold it up to the jurors. So when you collect an item of evidence, you obviously package it separately
Yes.
and seal it?
Yes.
Okay. And you did that on that particular night with this bottle, or did you just take it and package it later?
I packaged it later.
You also talked about the defendant agreeing to let you look through the Xterra, the car.
Correct.
And did you do that after the searching of the condominium?
Yes.
And I want to ask you a little bit about something you recovered from there. First of all, do you recall what time it was that you that you would have looked through the Xterra?
I'll refer to my notes for the
Sure.
time. 11:03 p.m.
And that would have been after the search was complete?
Yes.
Okay. And when you were looking through that car, did you find a receipt from a place called IKEA?
I did.
And did you make note of the date that was on that receipt?
Yeah, January 26, 2006.
And had you asked or had the defendant told you anything about whether he had been at IKEA?
He did.
What did he say about that?
He told us that he went to IKEA on that date and also a nearby Chevron station.
Okay. So that night you were there, he told you he'd been to IKEA on the 26th?
Well, actually, he had previously told us he went to IKEA on that date, and then that was during the interview piece, and then when we went out there and searched the Nissan and found the receipt, it backed up what he told us.
Okay, so during the interview that night, he talked about IKEA?
Yes.
And then, I'm sorry, did he also indicate that he had gone to, when we were talking to him after finding the receipt, that he'd gone to a gas station?
Yes.
And what did he specifically say? What was the description?
He went there to fuel up his Nissan Xterra.
And did he say it was a Chevron?
Yes.
And that was all when you were discussing things after the search of the Xterra that he talked about the gas station?
Yes.
Captain Anderson, I want to talk now about the next day. Did you go back to the defendant's condo to ask him some additional questions on the next day, February 7th?
I did.
And what time did you go do that? Do you recall? And feel free to look through your follow-up on the 7th.
It was 11:02 a.m.
And you had some more questions for him?
I did.
And did you note in your follow-up the information he gave you that day when you asked him additional questions?
Yes, I noted his responses to my questions.
I want to ask you to go through that, referring to your follow-up so we get it accurate. Did you actually number them in the order of kind of how you got the information?
I did.
Why don't you go through the first thing that the defendant told you that day?
In the words that I have here, so I can just read it off, report here. Martin said the hip scar was a result of surgery for a staph infection.
And was that referencing the hip scar that Nicole Pietz had on her body?
Yes.
And then why don't you read the next item?
Martin provided me with additional credit card information, including his account numbers. Martin thinks that Nicole canceled her regular American Express credit card.
And what was the next item?
I told Martin to keep Nicole's account active so we can monitor any activity.
And Captain, were you essentially following up on financial things and the potential that she could have used a card at that point?
Yes. Or continue to use a card. Or somebody else could continue to use the card. So.
And what's the next thing that he told you in response to a question?
Martin denied that Nicole had recently moved out for a temporary separation.
Now, is that information you had received that you asked him about, or did you just, what prompted that?
Yeah, that information came to my attention up to that point in the investigation, so I asked him a question about that.
And what's the next thing that you indicated he talked to you about?
Martin went to IKEA alone.
And what had you asked about that?
Well, I asked him if anybody else was with him.
And was that the IKEA that you had found the receipt for from the date of January 26th?
That's correct.
Okay. And then once you indicate what he next said.
Martin said that they started dating about 2 years before getting married. They were engaged for 14 months. They met in April of 2000.
And was that prompted by your questions?
Yes, it was.
Were you just trying to get background on their marriage?
Yes.
Why don't you read the next entry that you have there?
Nicole thought Martin was cheating on her because he became close with a Bally's coworker named Sabrina at the end of 2001. Martin denied sexual contact with Sabrina at this time, but about 1.5 years later, he had a big verbal argument with Nicole, and he slept with Sabrina out of spite. Martin was married to Nicole at the time. Martin doesn't think Nicole knew about his sexual encounter with Sabrina. Martin doesn't remember what the argument was about. Martin said this was the only time he was unfaithful to Nicole.
Now, did you ask him specifically about whether there were extramarital relationships, or how did that come up?
I did. I did.
And why were you doing that?
Part of the background investigation, part of finding out more information leading up to Nicole's murder.
And was it your understanding from his answer that he was telling you he had had essentially a one-night stand, a one-time sexual encounter with Sabrina?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would object to his understanding. I think the only thing relevant is what David said.
Correct.
I would ask that that be stricken.
Well, I don't-
Well, let me ask a clarifying question. Are these direct
You've heard the
quotes?
testimony as to what the defendant allegedly said to the detective. That's all you'll consider.
Are these direct quotes, or is this you writing down, paraphrasing what he said?
Writing down and paraphrasing what he said.
Okay. And, Your Honor, I'm going to ask again. I just want to make sure. So what he was telling you that day is he just slept with Sabrina one time when he was angry.
Yes.
What else did he tell you that day?
So number 8 here, I asked Martin about the tip we received that he allegedly put ecstasy in Nicole's drink. Martin denied this accusation and said this information is not true. Martin said that both Nicole and he would voluntarily take, quote, my E, end quote, which, from my understanding, is a ephedra, so they could stay up all night and go to work with minimal sleep.
Now, why were you asking him about ecstasy?
That information came to my attention
Are you
by
fam-
witnesses.
I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish.
By witnesses or coworkers, friends.
Are you familiar, what is ephedra when you say my E or ephedra?
Well, it's used in prescription medication. It's a type of drug that I believe is a stimulant, but I can't.
And are you
quote me
certain
on
it's
that.
prescription, or can it be bought over the counter at health clubs?
It could be bought over the counter, yes.
Is it used for trying to stay awake and be alert? Is that your
Yes.
understanding?
Yes.
And what's the next thing that you asked him about and that he answered?
Martin heard that Nicole had a disagreement with someone at work, but that was about 1 to 1.5 years ago.
And what prompted that information from him?
Information from people I talked to in this investigation.
And then what is the last thing that you indicate here?
Nicole never mentioned to him that anyone was stalking her.
And is that something you specifically asked was about stalking?
Yes.
At some point during the investigation, Captain Anderson, did you obtain a video from the 24-hour fitness gym?
I did.
And is part of that video, was it from the date of January 28th of 2006?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And did you obtain that video because it related to a phone call that came in from Nicole's phone?
Yes.
I want to talk about an interview you did at some point, and I'm going to refer you to the date of April 10th, 2006 in your follow-up at 13:10.
Okay.
Did you interview a individual named Christina Knutson?
I did.
And was she an employee at the time at the 24-hour fitness gym?
She was.
And was it your understanding she worked the front desk there?
Correct, yes.
Did you show her video footage from the January 28th date from 24-hour fitness?
I did.
And do you know if you showed her footage around the time that this phone call came in?
I did, yes, I did.
And What was the purpose of showing it to Ms. Knutson, if you recall, while you were interviewing her?
The purpose was to determine Mr. Pietz' whereabouts during the time of the phone call and determine if he was on video and what his actions were on the video.
And do you recall, was Ms. Knutson on the video at the reception desk during that portion?
I believe she was, yes.
And I don't want you to get into what she said to you, but did you actually take a statement from her?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what the question was.
I said I don't want you to say what she said, but did you take a statement from Ms. Knutson on that date?
I did.
Thank you. Any questions, Your Honor?
Ross?
Give me 1 second. Detective Anderson, I think you told us that your co-lead in this case, maybe I'm using the wrong terminology, was Detective Kathleen Decker. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, as I understand it, you're the lead detective, right?
Yes.
And then Kathleen, Miss Decker, Detective Decker, was the second lead?
Yes.
And so you and her did a lot of these chores or investigative steps together, right?
We did.
And you also did things individually, too.
We did, yes.
And when you do these things, you would always try to be as accurate as you could in terms of keeping records, in terms of doing reports and follow-up reports and notes and so forth. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's important so that years later, such as we have here, where we're about 7 years past the time of the event, you can go back and review your records. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you've been reviewing an exhibit today, which is, I believe, or maybe you have that in front of you with an exhibit number on it, which is your report. Is that exhibit number 44? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of many of your answers today, you refer back to that exhibit in order to refresh your recollection, right?
Yes, and for accuracy, for dates and times.
Because I expect in the intervening 6 or 7 years, memories tend to fade. You'd agree with that?
I would agree with that, yes.
And I would expect also in the intervening 7 years, you've had many, many other investigations that you've done, which have been also complex. Is that right?
That's correct.
So to keep things straight and to keep your memory straight, you have to have that you rely on a follow-up report, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So in terms of your being out at the condo on February 6th, let me just put this into context so we're all on the same page here. February 6th was the date that Miss Pietz' body was found.
Yes.
And that was sometime mid-afternoon, right?
Correct.
And you were out at the scene for many hours. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you and Detective Decker, or you or one of you, decided that you would go up and interview Mr. Pietz that day. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you recall if there were some other detectives that went with you to do that interview?
Yes.
And who was that?
Sergeant Stitch and Detective Ditto.
And those are the Snohomish County deputies that have similar positions with Snohomish County that you and Detective Decker have with King County.
That's correct.
They're in the equivalent of the major crimes unit up there.
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to David Pietz, I believe you told us on direct that he looked like he was ready to cry, but he didn't cry, or some words to that effect?
He gave the appearance of crying, but there was no physical indicators as far as tears coming down.
Okay, well, would you please look at your entry on February 6, 2006 at 20:28 hours? and that's on page 20 if you look at the upper right.
I'm sorry, what time?
This is at 2028,
Okay,
Monday, February 6th. I believe it's on your page 20.
right.
Do you see the entry there for Monday?
Mm-hmm.
And you say you arrived at, it starts off, you arrived at Martin's condo?
Yes,
And this is what you were referring to this earlier when you were testifying regarding about this interaction with David Pietz, right?
correct.
So this helped you refresh your recollection when you first testified on direct.
Yes.
Okay, and I'd go down about 6 or 7 lines to where you and Detective Decker decided to let Martin know that the body was similar to Miss Pietz's description. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you see where you wrote right after that, he then broke down and began crying?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be, you would rely on that in terms of accuracy.
Yes.
Another question. You indicated that Martin Pietz, Sr., the father, was not present during the tape-recorded interview. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
If the transcript of the interview, and the jury heard the testimony yesterday, if the transcript of the interview showed that Mr. Martin Pietz was present for half the interview, and then when there were questions about sexual issues between Mr. Pietz and his wife, and at that point Mr. Martin Pietz Sr. was asked to leave, would you consider that more accurate than your memory at this point?
Yeah, actually, you did jog my memory on that one, yes. I knew he wasn't there for the entire interview. Typically, we would separate family members for interviews, but he wanted the support of his father, so we allowed that.
Okay. And then in terms of, you're asking Martin if you could search the, or look through the house, you had Martin sign a form called consent to search, right?
That's correct.
And that's a form that King County Police use,
Yes.
and it's similar to forms that all police officers, all police departments use, as far as you know, at least in Washington.
Correct.
And that has all sorts of stuff on it about you don't have to sign it, but if you will, you can, whatever. Yes?
That's correct.
He signed one of those for the house at that point, and also for the consent of his Nissan Xterra, right?
That's correct.
And the Xterra was parked in the garage.
Yes.
And you went back the next day, you said, that would have been February 7, 2006, and asked Martin, or asked David some more questions, right?
That's correct.
And those are what you just testified to on direct, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the IKEA store, there was a receipt, I think you said, in the Xterra that related to a purchase at the IKEA store on January 26th, right?
That's correct.
And is the reason you asked him these questions about the IKEA store, is that because there was a charge on Nicole's credit card that came through for, I believe, February, or maybe it was January 30th. Was that the reason you asked him that question?
At that point, we did not have credit card information. It was still early on in the investigation. It was based on information that was told to us by Mr. Pietz.
Okay. And are you aware that at some point, maybe a day later, Mr. Pietz, David Pietz, contacted the Snohomish County detective to tell him that there was a charge on Nicole's?
I'm going to object that to this statement and his testimony that it was a day later from this.
Well, at some time later, he called and talked to the detective.
Objection. It happened earlier. Counsel's misstating the evidence.
Counsel, let me suggest, it is good to get the questions right, but what the exact testimony is up to the jury and not up to counsel to object that that was not the testimony. You can object to the form of the question, but in terms of the testimony, counsel should not be suggesting to the jury their recollection of the testimony until you get to closing arguments.
Never mind, let me move on to a different question here. In terms of the bottle of, the prescription bottle that was found at the condo, you said that was for Sept.
Correct.
You're aware that's a narcotic drug,
Yes.
and that's equivalent to Percocet, is it?
From my understanding, yes.
And I understand the bottle had the prescribed amount as 8 pills per day. Does that ring a bell?
Sounds familiar. I'd have to look at the bottle to confirm that.
I'm handing you what's been marked as Exhibit 46, and please take a look at the bottle.
That's correct.
And there were 56, at least the bottle indicates that there were 56 pills in the bottle when it was, at least initially, 56 pills.
Correct.
And is the date of that prescription, or at least the date on the bottle, January 26?
It is.
Thank you. You can put that back in the envelope. Your Honor, if I could just have a second. Detective, maybe I missed something, and I'm going to ask you to clarify this for me. I believe you told us that during one of your interviews with David Pietz, he talked about going to IKEA and also filling up his car at a Chevron station. Do you recall telling us that?
Yes.
And where in your report is that? I imagine it's in there. I just couldn't find it.
It's dated February 6th at, it says 23:03 hours, so 11:03 p.m.
Okay. So this would have been after the tape-recorded interview that you asked him about that?
Yes, after we found the receipt.
Okay. Your Honor, we don't have any more questions of the detective or the captain at this time, but we'd like him to remain under subpoena and may call him again in our case.
Just a couple of brief questions, Your Honor.
You may. Go ahead.
Captain Anderson, counsel was asking you about the description you put in your report of the defendant when you informed him that it was his wife Nicole's body who'd been found.
Right.
And if you need to refer to your report, referring back to February 6th of 06 at 20:28 hours, if you want to turn to that, he had you, or he read to you, and you confirmed that what you wrote in your report was he broke down and began crying. Is that right?
Correct.
And I just want to make sure, is that inconsistent with what you testified to today, where you said he made the appearance of crying, but I didn't see tears?
Your Honor, I think it's up to the jury to decide whether it's inconsistent or not.
I'm asking him if he
He,
thinks.
he can testify as to what he meant when he wrote it down. They can certainly make a determination as to whether his testimony makes sense in that regard. And they're free to find any inconsistency they want. But he can certainly say what he meant when he wrote both items in his report.
So is that inconsistent with what you said today, or is,
So, you might want to rephrase your question.
let me ask you this.
To the objection.
Let me ask you this. When counsel asked you the question, were you intending to give the impression that his refreshing your memory with your statement has now changed your mind about the way the defendant acted after you responded that day and told him about his wife?
No.
Your Honor, I was going to object to the form, but the answer came out already, so anyway.
Did you see any tears on the defendant that night?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that question, counsel.
Did you see any tears by the defendant that night?
No.
The only other clarification I want to ask you is, after you searched the Xterra and found the IKEA receipt, is that when the defendant first mentioned having gone to IKEA and then gone to the Chevron gas station, to your recollection?
You know, I have to look back over his statement to see if he mentioned IKEA in the actual interview, but he had previously told us about that, so I don't know if it was right after the interview, the recorded interview, or it was obviously previous to actually searching in the Nissan Xterra. And as far as his mentioning about fueling up at the Chevron station, it was all kind of together. I mean, he explained his steps when he was down there, what he was up to, his activities.
And just to clarify, the gas station mention, was that after you found the IKEA receipt in the Xterra?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for you.
Just one question, or a couple questions. In terms of the interview that you conduct, or when you conduct an interview, and especially one in this case, you and the other detectives are the ones asking the questions. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
You may step down. You're not excused. He's asking you to remain under call.
Okay.
And you may be brought back to testify again.
All right. Thank you.
I apologize. That's our last witness.
That's what I'd heard this morning from you. Members of the jury, actually the parties have done a pretty good job of keeping things flowing with not losing time because of unavailability of witnesses, but we do have 20 minutes left, and they don't have another witness for us. So you're going to get a little longer lunch hour. We will resume at the normal time. Oh, there she is. People are always sneaking up on me today. We'll take our lunch. The afternoon witnesses is, you say McNabb and Duddy?
And Detective Pavlovich?
Anything else before we break for lunch, counsel?
No.
Let's get the defendant out of here first.